During our first class period on the novel Native Son by Richard Wright in my American Lit course, I was pretty surprised when the discussion turned to an important scene in the novel that I hadn't remembered reading. In the scene, the main character, 20-year-old Bigger Thomas, and his friend Jack, both young black men, go to a movie theater and masturbate in the seats before their film begins. Though obviously crude, the scene is rather crucial to the story, and I couldn't believe that I had missed it. As it turned out, the scene was never in my edition of the novel in the first place. It had been written or censored out. I was using my dad's copy, which he had taken from a friend while in grad school at UNC in the early 90s. This edition is from 1966. Native Son was actually originally published in this expurgated form, and this is the version that most people would have read during the 20th century. Richard Wright was forced to censor his true version at the encouragement of his editor and the Book of the Month Club, which featured Wright as their first black author. The scene in the movie theater wasn't the only thing that got cut. Later in the novel, Bigger has to help a drunk white girl back to her room late at night. In the original version, the scene is very sexually charged, and Bigger is pretty obviously aroused by her. In the excised version, his desire for the girl is downplayed. It wasn't until 1991, when Native Son was restored to its full original version, that these details were revealed to the public. And so my 1966 copy, with all of its relative cleanliness, isn't actually an anomaly, but the historical norm. The excising of these more indelicate portions of Native Son isn't just the result of 1940s American prudeness, but an indication of how, even as this revolutionary novel about race was being published, discussions of race were still largely controlled. The cut scenes and lines provide crucial texture to the content of the novel, with both the movie theater scene and Bigger's altercation with the white girl contributing to the novel's exploration of sexuality and race relations, and each adding to Bigger's own complexity as a character. The fact that Wright's editor and the Book of the Month Club were uncomfortable with black male sexuality, particularly with how it related to white women, is pretty ironic. Some of the very criticisms of society that Wright was making were playing out in real life with the publication of his novel. Within the odd transition in my 1966 version, in the space where content should have been, exist systems of racial control, black censorship and repression, and white discomfort. The space is then an example of how what is unsaid is often more telling than what is said, and maybe it's also a lesson in listening to your professor when they tell you to get a certain edition of a book.